Tommy just touched on a lot of the realities of modern brewing. And another reality of being a craft brewery owner in these days is you gotta be politically active. What we're about to do is look at a case study of how that political activity and brands and distributors and other stakeholders can develop mutually beneficial programs, even after years of disagreement, as the people of Texas can attest. And that was the case in Texas this year. Craft breweries' involvement in the legislative process led to something happening that a lot of people did not think was possible: a compromise between the Lone Star State's brewers and wholesalers. And that led to the overturning of a law outlawing beer-to-go sales at manufacturing breweries. Texas had been the only state in the nation that had banned beer-to-go sales at manufacturing breweries. So in February, the Texas Craft Brewers Guild and the Beer Alliance of Texas announced that they had reached a stakeholder agreement to repeal the ban, despite a lack of initial support from another powerful wholesaler lobbying group. The Guild and the Beer Alliance had momentum on their side. Legislators took notice, and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle championed companion bills in the House and Senate. By May, that legislation was on the verge of passing. A final compromise was reached. Consumers could buy up to one case of 12-ounce cans per brewery visit per day. Those sales would count against an existing 5,000 barrel cap for on-premise taproom sales. The bill passed both chambers, and the governor signed it into law in June. Sales started in September. 3 months later, 3 key players are here to discuss how they work together to change the law and share how others can do so in their states. Joining me today are Adam DeBauer, the co-founder of Austin Beer Works. I feel like I'm on The Price is Right now. Come on down. Texas State Rep Eddie Rodriguez, and Rick Donnelly, the president of the Beer Alliance of Texas. What's up? Good to see you. Thanks. So that was a very long-winded synopsis that probably doesn't do justice for, how long this issue has sort of dragged out in Texas. This was at least a 7-year process, I think it was.
Well, yeah, the first legislation that I know that I was advocating for beer-to-go sales was filed by Brock Wagner, actually Representative Jessica Farrar in the Houston area, in the 2007 legislative session. So it was actually 10 years ago, well, more than 10 years ago, that first bill that would have allowed some beer to go out of the brewery, and it would have been attached to a brewery tour, basically. It wasn't until 2013 that we actually got the legal right to even have tap rooms. So Texas was pretty far behind for a very long time versus the rest of the country in that you couldn't come into our breweries and buy a pint. You couldn't buy anything, really. And so what we did to get around that was, and it was, basically explicitly allowed by the Alcoholic Beverage Commission, was we'd sell you a $10 pint glass and you could get 3 beers in your pint glass, but we weren't selling you the beer, we were just selling you the glass. And so there was a significant reforms in 2013, and beer to go was the last piece of that massive reform that just simply didn't get in the 2013 reforms. And Mr. Donnelly can certainly speak more to that because he was at the table in 2013, I wasn't. I didn't become the legislative committee chair for the Texas Craft Brewers Guild until 2017, and so I was present for the 17 session where we failed miserably. We actually lost rights in the 17 session, and the 2019 session was really our response to how ineffective and how poorly we did in the 17 session.
So I guess, Eddie, why was this year different?
Well, I think there's several reasons, but for me, I think the 2 main ones is you had much younger representatives I'm in the House of Representatives, much younger representatives coming in the legislature on the Democratic side. I'm a Democrat. And on the Republican side, you had this really undercurrent of this free market type of mentality, which is great. And what you have is these new younger Democrats coming in, agreeing with that philosophy and wanting to help small businesses. And you just have this kind of this alignment that really hadn't happened in a while. Plus, I think you also couple with that consumers now are just, it just doesn't make any sense for them that they couldn't go to a brewery that in their neighborhood or in their community and not be able to buy beer to go. It just doesn't make sense in 2019. And so I think those things together made a big difference. You started seeing the changes. I think even in 17, you started seeing different attitudes changing.
Rick, why were wholesalers so willing to come to the table this year? You did so in 13, so you came back to the table.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the progression of the reforms, it's been steps at a time, and that's not unusual in the legislative process. I think Representative Rodriguez will tell you that. But yet, I think it was because we kept the lines of communications open with our craft brewers, and we never felt like it was us against them kind of mentality. It was just the natural progression of the industry in the state. We were also talking to all those new members that were coming in, as well as Eddie was, and it's been very concerning, I think, especially at a time when the beer category has been suffering somewhat. And we're all looking, I think, for a way to get a positive atmosphere around the category of beer back. Wine and spirits have, quite frankly, been much better at innovation than the overall beer industry has. The craft brewers have been the exception to that, and I think that's why there was some great deal of success with them. But politics, by very definition, is the art of compromise. And so to turn down the volume, some of the negative publicity that was going on both sides, we just felt like it was time to see if we couldn't come to an understanding, and so we could all get back to selling beer.
Eddie, did you see this as a make or break year for getting the legislation through?
Well, I don't know about make or break. I mean, I think it definitely, if it didn't happen this session, in the Texas legislature, we meet for 5 months, roughly every other year. So, things move a lot more slowly. It probably would have taken at least 3 more sessions to do it. But we had the sunset bill for TABC, Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission. Sunset bills, just very briefly, every agency is looked at every 10 years to see if that agency should continue. And what happens when that bill, so it was Texas TABC's turn this year, and it was an opportunity to, if the bill itself didn't move, which it wasn't moving, it was an important vehicle to offer an amendment onto that bill. So it was not a make or break, but it certainly would have postponed it for a long time, I think.
Adam, a turning point for the guild seemed to be the launch of Craft Pack. I guess, how did that sort of precipitate this change?
Yeah, so we'd always believed that we were on the right side of the issue, and that we we had the hearts and the minds of the people, our constituents, if you will. And so we'd go into the Capitol, and we believed that we were on the right side of the issue and that we had the right position. But it turns out that money talks in politics, and so with the authority of our board of directors, the Texas Craft Brewers Guild board of directors that I sit on, our board chair and I started in the summer of 17 putting together the pack, and we put together bylaws, and we actually we've got officers and the whole thing, and we raised $100,000, which was a crazy thing for us to do because none of us is in this world. We didn't get involved in beer because we wanted to be involved in politics. I'd rather just put my boots on and go to work and everybody be happy. But
so we're not going to see you run for the legislature?
Not a chance in hell.
Plus, you don't live in my district, do you?
I don't live in your district, but I would never challenge you, sir.
Right.
But it's one of those things where we recognize that if we wanted to be effective, that we had to actually play the same game that other industry stakeholders are playing, and we had to be big boys about it, big boys and girls for that matter, and that we had to engage with our elected officials the way that they need to be engaged with. And because of the way that our system is built, it's a temporary legislature. They're legislators all year round, but they only meet for that 140-day period, and all of the state's business has to get done during that. And so what I'll tell you just from the get-go is that it opened doors that had previously never been opened for us. And I believe that it was part of what really led some credibility to our case this time around. And we didn't just raise that money from Texas craft brewers. We raised that money from thousands of Texas craft beer fans. We had a petition. We sold, we basically, if you gave us a $100 contribution to the PAC, we'd give you a T-shirt. And if you wore that T-shirt out and about, brewery owners would buy you beers, that kind of stuff. So under TAB code, of course. But we had 15,000 signatures on our petition, that said that, consumers in the state of Texas wanted to see things change. And so it was a new opportunity for us that we simply had never had before. And now of course, I've proven that it's effective, and now I have to keep it running, which is not at all what I signed up for. I'm an operations guy. I'm a brewer by trade. I still wear boots every day at the brewery. But now I actually have to think about fundraising. The next legislative session's right around the corner for us already.
So is that something that you would suggest guilds in other states and craft brewers in other states to do if they have not formed a political action committee?
Absolutely. I think the very first revelation is that whether we like it or not, we're involved in a political business. And yeah, politics can be ugly, and we see that playing out at the national level and the local level alike. But how I was able to sell it to my membership is that, we are single issue voters at this point, and it doesn't matter if this guy voted for that and this guy voted for that. We're going to write them a check just alike because, they need to know that we exist and that we can be of value to them. And not just because we wrote them a check, but because our businesses are in their districts and we're creating jobs, and they're not just crappy jobs, they're quality jobs with benefits. We're creating skill sets, and we're creating careers, and those are the kind of things that these people need to hear because it's true. And the PAC really opens those doors and helps us get that point across in a way that we just couldn't get that point across otherwise.
If I can just add to that, just really quick, were you going to say something? No. I think that it is important, and I know every state's different, but when you establish a PAC, or you form a PAC, it shows a level of sophistication and maturity and where you are as an industry. And it's not just about the money, it just shows really that you're organized, right? And you have an agenda. And also, we had a great session this past session, but who knows what next session will bring. You might actually have a bill that'll roll back some of the stuff that we did, and you just never know. So it's a way to keep organized, stay organized, and to be on top of whatever the issues of the industry might.
So it becomes a lot of defense too.
Absolutely, yeah.
If I could add something to that, and to the credit of the Beer Alliance and Mr. Donnelly in particular, part of this agreement, we have a memorandum of understanding. We have an agreement where we were able to effectively pass all the legislative asks that we had, but we also agreed that we weren't going to come back next session. Actually, we won't come back for the next 5 sessions, asking to increase any of our barrelage caps. So the barrelage caps exist in most states. But this is one thing where, we always want to ask for more. Other people might want to ask for less, but this is a way that we can memorialize the rights that we already have and not have to play defense on a lot of those rights that we hold so dear.
Rick, what value did you see?
Well, obviously what we think we got in exchange, and it's that art of compromise, and I want to congratulate the craft brewers for understanding that, because the moratorium coincides with the next sunset review process. And we thought that was probably the next time that would be beneficial to the legislature and to the people of Texas, as well as the stakeholders, to discuss those issues at that time. So we take very, very seriously that memorandum. We're going to hold ourselves to that promise, and we expect the other stakeholders that signed on to do the same. And so hopefully we're not going to have these bones of contention that have previously existed. And we feel like the memorandum is tight enough in the fact that it talks about any direct or indirect attempt to initiate anything that would touch on those caps, and almost everything in the alcoholic beverage code dealing with the relationship between a distributor and a craft brewer is embedded in those caps. And so we think we've got peace in the valley for at least 10 years. And I think the legislature especially appreciates that because, quite frankly, from my discussions with many members, was they were sick and tired of every session, this continuing muddying of the waters. And they have many, many other issues that are very, very important to the state, that they don't need to be refereeing beer fights. And that's the reason when I say to other states that you really need to open the line of communications to all the stakeholders and see if you can craft any kinds of understandings before you ever go to the legislature. It's very, very important if you go with a plan, which we did, to the legislature of how do we take this issue off the table in the future. And it worked.
It really worked.
It's worked in many other industries that have done similar type things. And but it's very, very important. If you're in business, you need to be involved in the political process.
Eddie.
And one sidebar I'd make, I don't think Eddie wants a temporary legislature. He wants a citizens' legislature.
Sorry. Part-time, I think.
Part-time
Maybe a
is
better way to
better
put
way
it.
to- yeah.
Sorry.
Were you
Thanks
sick
for
of it all, Eddie? Were you sick of having the same conversation over and over again?
Well, I was sick of, what made me sick about the whole thing is that it just didn't make any sense. The law that was in place before we changed it made no sense. And you have wineries can sell wine to go at their wineries in Texas. Same thing with distillers. They can sell up 2 bottles, I think it is, a month. And it made, so beer was the only thing. And then you have, brew pubs, which are produce smaller amounts of beer that can sell beer to go and growlers and whatnot. It was only this one small segment that wasn't able to do this, and it just didn't seem very Texan-like, not very business-friendly, not very small business. So, yeah, I was kind of tired of that. I think, but the membership as a whole, I mean, to your question, I think didn't really want to fight over this anymore. It was like, this seems like we can solve this problem. And so I think, to Rick's point, getting together and having some agreement before session was really, really important. Even though there was still one outside group that was not quite there at the time, they ended up coming on board late.
How big of an obstacle was the Wholesale Beer Distributors of Texas to getting this done? Or was this going to go without their blessing?
Well, we might have different answers to this. So I'll say, I think they were a pretty big obstacle. They certainly were an obstacle and a problem in 2017. But I think ultimately what ended up happening as to how the bill got passed as an amendment, and it ended up passing by 4 votes or whatever it was, I think in the Senate it was much more clear that it had a really good chance. So once it was over to the Senate, I think then they decided it was time to come on because something was going to probably pass. But before that, they were a big obstacle. They had, going back to the PAC situation, they donate a lot of, money to Democrats, Republicans, everybody. And so really what won the day, I think at the end of it was the argument. We had a better argument. It was the right thing to do.
Rick, you mentioned that beer has struggled, sales have slowed. Do you see this as a brand building opportunity that craft brewers can do, test things out in their tap rooms, and then bring to market?
Absolutely. And I think this is something that I've always said, the 3-tier system is not broken. It needs to evolve in some instances that keeps up with consumer trends, with technology trends, with other factors in the general marketplace. And I think this is evident of that. But let me say that, Eddie is right. It was a closer vote in the House, which we always knew it was going to be, but it passed on unanimous consent over in the Senate. And, I've always said our strength is probably in the Senate more than it is in the House. Wholesale beer distributors is just the opposite. They probably have traditionally been stronger in the House than they were in the Senate. And so I think that's reflective in those votes. But the one thing you have to keep in mind is you have to get fortunate too. There are windows of opportunity in the legislative process, and you have to be ready. And having a good author like Eddie was, who worked it hard, is very, very important. He believed in what we were doing, attempting to do, and he stuck with it. But it's very, very important, I think. And Eddie's also right. It's not so much how much money you're giving. The strength of beer distributors in the state of Texas has always been, we've been at it a long time, a real long time. Both groups giving not nearly as large in today's numbers as you might think individually, but it's been building up over the course of time. And you always start small and you build up over the course of time. And that goodwill is built up over that long period of time.
Adam, you're 4 months in. How's it working out for Austin Beer Works?
I mean, it's been great. On an average day, we're seeing an extra 20 to 30 transactions a day, and so extrapolate that at maybe say $10 an average transaction. $200 to $300 in extra beer sales. But obviously, the vast majority of those beer sales are taproom only beers. So we've got our production system. We're a self-distributing regional brewery. We sold a little over 20,000 barrels last year in our 45-mile footprint. And we're on track to do that again this year. But for our tap room, we've got just a little small 20-barrel pilot system, which is hilarious to say that because our pilot system is bigger than something like 90% of the breweries in America. But we sell, all the beers that come off that pilot system are tap room exclusives. And the vast majority of those beer-to-go sales are those taproom exclusives. And so in the springtime, we're going to be releasing 2 new year-round brands that are coming right off of those taproom, the proof of concept in our taproom, basically. They've been the number 1 and number 2 selling beers, month over month in our taproom. We are starting to make them more for draft distribution, and they're selling very well in draft. And so when we go to our retail partners to say, look, we've got something that we believe is going to be of value for you guys, and we can back it up with the numbers in our tap room. And that's exactly what we told the legislature we were going to do. And I'm just so happy that it's actually proving to actually be panning out that way.
It's amazing how things work out, right? Just a reminder, these guys are up here. Fire away with your questions. I'll ask them. We're getting down to the last few minutes here. So Eddie, when there is an issue like this, you talked a little bit about wanting to see groups come together beforehand and come with something. What else should brewers and I guess wholesalers in this case be thinking of before they come to their lawmaker? What do you want to see from them?
Well, it's that you understand your issue and what you need, and then you come to me or whoever your legislator is with a specific ask. And if the ask is just really, I just want to get to know you better, that's fine too. But I think communication is very, very critical when it comes to the legislative process and what you want to get in ahead of time. If I'm seeing you and meeting you for the first time, 2 months into session, it must not be that important to you is kind of what I'm thinking, right? But I'd like to see compromise ahead of time if it's possible. If it's not possible, then you got to go to war, you go to war. But ideally, like for me, I think a lot of my colleagues would say the same thing, is that if someone's just not coming to the table, they won't even meet with you, that's not a good thing. So I thought in this case, you guys had reached out to the distributors plenty of times, and they wouldn't come out to see them or really talk seriously to them. The wholesale beer distributors, I mean. And that was an argument that I was using with my colleagues when I was trying to get the bill passed, right? So, and members just don't like to see that. They like good faith efforts, right?
Yeah, and we were trying to do it, as a guild, but then our individual members were talking to their wholesalers individually and trying to convince them to, just come to the table. And we never got a phone call back.
Never got the phone call. So in this case, that obviously worked against the wholesale beer distributors, that they weren't willing to go to the table.
Well, I think when you win by a vote by 4 or 3, whatever it ended up being, any little thing could change that, right? I certainly use that to my advantage, to the advantage of the bill passing, and the fact that I didn't get a hearing on the bill at all in my committee, in the committee. I used that to.
And that was certainly not Representative Rodriguez's fault. When I talk about those windows of opportunity, the sunset process gave that window of opportunity to open. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, I suspect.
Yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Guys, give it up for these 3.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Eddie. It's nice to meet you. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it.